So maybe before we start, I will ask you if you could both introduce yourselves. Maybe Jay, I will start with you.
Sure. My name's Jay Gambetta. I've been working on quantum my whole entire life since university, and I happen to run the IBM group where we're building quantum computers.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Sudeep also, for those of you that have been during the morning, you might have seen Sudeep in the AI and Society, AI and Energy, and now he's here for the quantum panel, so if you could explain that.
I had a little something to do that magazine over there on your table. No, little known fact, about 25 years or so I've been studying kind of from the side on a lot of things about quantum computing and quantum physics and things like that. I'm a great fan of a lot of the physicists and a lot of the physics and all the stuff that goes into it. So I'm here to learn, just like a lot of you. I've always enjoyed that, and I'm really honored that Jay, you and your team are here to educate us.
That's going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, likewise. We are super excited to be doing like this panel with the people from IBM that are clearly like leading in this field. So maybe the first question, Jay, I will ask it to you. Quantum is often compared to classical computing, but they operate in fundamentally completely different. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, what are like the differences and the breakthroughs that quantum computing has?
Yeah, so I think we just saw...
Yeah, and you can correct anything that Alexander...
No, it was quite good. Yeah, I know what algorithm they were referring to. So, yeah, so when I get asked about quantum, people often think like quantum is the next revolution.
Yep.
I actually think what's really cool is quantum computing is like the second quantum revolution. The first was very simple, is we in the physical sciences used to think physics and chemistry, they were all different pillars, right? And early on, people even believed physics was above chemistry, it was emergent. And early in the 1900s, they showed that nature is fundamentally discrete. And that's this concept of quantum. It comes in discrete lumps. And that has led for the last 100 years in inventions such as transistors, scanning tunneling microscopes. I can't think of any technology that hasn't done that. So it's had a huge impact. So what's really cool in quantum computing is quantum physics became, or quantum mechanics became, the foundation of all the physical sciences. It turns out that nature wants to tell us what it means about the act of doing information processing. So quantum computing is bringing the sciences and mathematics together. And we always try to do analogies of what is a quantum computer. But what it is it's a new way of having a different primitive. So we're going beyond plus and minus. And all computers work with just simply adding numbers together. To give a new primitive, the mathematical way of it is like doing group theory, but I'm not going to go there. But this new primitive allows you to calculate things that if you were to represent that on a classical computer, it would require all the ridiculously amount of energy or a lot of space. And that new primitive has two fundamental applications. One is allowing us to simulate nature. So can we come up with better materials? Can we actually simulate nature, how nature works? And that means we can make lighter material, stronger material, understand how fertilizer, or various different applications. The second is it gives you a way of finding hidden patterns or structure in data, and that you'll talk about later is how we actually break encryption, or in the example that was given earlier, to find which one is the hidden card. But more generally, can you find that structure? And so then we see applications that you have this new math that you can apply on a quantum computer that can speed up applications from everywhere, potentially in the financial industry, to simulating correlations in health data. So what is a quantum computer? It's bringing nature together to allow you to do those calculations.
Okay. And it's fair to say that quantum computer will not replace classical computer, but rather than complement things that the classical computing cannot do?
So yes and no. So the theory answer to you is everything you can do on a classical computer, you can do on a quantum computer. Practically, though, if you can already do that math efficiently on a classical computer, use a classical computer. So when we go to build the future of computing, we imagine quantum computers working with classical computers, and what algorithms work best on classical computers run on classical, and when you need this algorithm that would be really hard to run on a classical computer, you run on a quantum.
Okay, perfect. I don't know, Sudeep, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not different than, calculators. We still use calculators,
Yep.
right? And they're a little bit more, primitive and so on, but it does the job. And then similarly, there's augmentation and replacement with your mobile phone, having a calculator in it and things like that. But I think it's like, the thing I really love about, with quantum computing is, I think it gives us sort of an opportunity to redefine how we think and how we learn. So like there's a lot of metacognitive processes that once you start understanding a lot of the principles behind quantum computing, because it emulates nature in reality, are actually become very, very intuitive. But you almost have to untrain and then retrain your brain to kind of think that way. Once you start, seeing the stuff, then you're able to really see things in a new light. Much akin to like, it doesn't mean that for some transaction or something like that, you may well be using a classical computer, and that's fine.
Yep.
It's absolutely fine. But now it adds to the sort of corpus of technologies and tools that you can use to explore problems that are frankly very, very large and hard.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and you already mentioned some applications and the industries that might benefit a little bit more from this type of quantum computing once we are able to have them and use them more at scale and constantly. But maybe if we can talk a little bit like which sectors will be like leading this, and yeah.
So yeah, the first sector is the sector that uses a lot of HPC or a lot of high performance classical computing. So particularly if you're an enterprise that does a lot of computational chemistry or computational optimization problems, or even eventually large simulation type stuff. So we're seeing things that could matter in energy, it could matter in semiconductor, it could matter in even like simulating risk calculations in the financial market. So first start where you use a lot of computation in that area. I call that like horizon one. The second horizon is where, and I'm not going to say quantum's going to replace AI. I think we're going to think of extending AI to allow quantum as one of those primitives. So we're exploring when can we use quantum algorithms that when the data looks random for classical algorithms, a quantum algorithm can go in there and give you a better way of discriminating, of finding patterns. And so eventually, if you're using a lot of, so we're working, example, clients are working with us at Cleveland Clinic want to understand correlations in health data or life science. So you see that it's going to impact, in my opinion, every industry, but starting with the ones that use a lot of computational resources today.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Sudeep, if you want to add, if not, I will.
Yeah, no, it's, to me, it's almost just, there's three genres, right? There's like advancing the science itself. And then there's some of the things like you talked about simulating nature it's not trivial, right? And by understanding that foundationally you're able, there's a lot of industrial applications, whether that's rare treatments of diseases, being able to kind of isolate what are different variables that are at play, and even this application of customizable, like individual medicine and things like that has a lot of applications there. I think it's one of those things like finance and insurance and things like that typically have a lot of money, which would then go into sort of financing some of these things. So like that may be an early adopter because there's a large sort of quotient of data, but there's also, there's a need and there's a level of complexity, especially with risk modeling. I think that's kind of an area to watch. But to Jay's point, I would almost see there's a little bit of recursion, where it's basically the output of the application galvanizes the science, and then by galvanizing the science, you end up having this plethora of other opportunities.
Yeah. So maybe let me start with you, Sudeep, on this one,
Sure.
Because given your wide range of topics that you covered today, not every business will be directly involved in quantum R&D.
Yeah.
But what impacts could be, and the impacts will impact everyone, even if they are not doing like the research and being part of that. So,
yeah, I think the some of the stuff we touched on, especially with the AI and labor panel this morning, I think those are going to be important because right now we think about with corporate training, and this is true of a lot of higher ed institutions as well, we're very, very focused on the tasks and what are the different training that we need to be able to execute on tasks. As AI becomes more prominent in terms of whether that's AI agents or different sort of processes, once we have technologies like quantum computing, some of those tasks may be easier to sort of accomplish. And then I think it's really important to start reflecting on how do we learn, how do we think, and then in the corporate training space, are we sort of equipping our employees that space to be able to develop and grow, and are we actually prioritizing metacognitive things, communications abilities, all these other kinds of things, which I think are really necessary because like, let's face it, quantum can be very complicated. So the clearer you are as a communicator and you understand some of the subtleties of how to communicate effectively, the better off you're going to be at explaining processes. And then I think with we have this black box problem with some of the AI in particular. Trust is not something to be trifled with, right? So if you have a conversation where you have customer trust, it ends up building the relationship. It builds the foundation for the relationship. So your ability to communicate as an employee, your ability to think, being able to absorb different information, and this flexibility of saying, okay, with quantum, there's quite a number of ways this can play out. Let's acknowledge that as it is, and have that sort of mental neural plasticity in spades.
Yeah, and maybe, I don't know, Jay, if you want to add from IBM perspective.
Yeah, so I think the question was, there are obviously companies like IBM that are building hardware. Yeah. Not everyone can be in the path of building hardware. It's a lot of R&D to do it. But often, we talked about the enterprises. I would say, yes, our hardware today is at the point that we can no longer simulate it with a classical computer. And we think that's a big deal. It's like a scientific tool. And we intend to make it better, bigger and better. I've said we have a public roadmap and we want a fault-tolerant quantum computer by 2029. So that will be a large-scale computation that does many of the algorithms we talked about. But just like we are in classical computer, we're now beyond what we can't simulate. Understanding numerical methods in the quantum space, doing numerical algorithm study, creating those students that are going to graduate, say, from a university with their own new algorithm and say, I want to build this into a solution for enterprise, that is all starting now.
Yeah.
So I would say this whole period of algorithm discovery is just launching off. When I say algorithm discovery, I don't mean the pen and paper algorithms, the complexity ones. I mean the numerical methods using a quantum computer. So I would say I predict we're going to see more industries getting involved in the quantum R&D than just the ones building it, because now we've got the hardware where that algorithm can start. And so from IBM's perspective, we plan to build good quantum processors, but if we're going to have a healthy quantum ecosystem, we need good algorithm and software solutions. We need good industry understanding of how those software solutions can matter for business. So I think you're going to see it go from quantum R&D that was always about building the hardware to algorithm, software, and eventually even services. So I actually expect over the next few years, the scope of the amount of industries doing quantum R&D is actually going to get much, much bigger. Yeah. Does everyone need to be a quantum computing expert? I'm not convinced the answer to that is yes. I think if you have got good applied math, good workforce development, good tools, it's going to be like AI eventually that many people will be able to use it without going into it. But we've got to see that R&D go across the whole space.
Okay, yeah. And maybe with that, like, collaboration will be key.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, like different sectors or players will focus in different things, and different companies will need to come together, like, to create this possible future.
Yeah, and I would even add not only companies, you'll get research labs, universities, and like you'll get, we have a thing we call the IBM Quantum Network that has enterprises, it has national labs, research. We imagine working groups, algorithm research, various different companies emerging. And this is the exciting thing. It's starting to open up that scope right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the ecosystem. I think you can't say it any better, right? Where it's just because this ecosystem is, it's a small, relatively small ecosystem now, but it continues to grow, continues to expand, and it adapts through that change. And basically, the more organizations in that ecosystem, the better, because then you're galvanizing all of those perspectives as your sort of raw material to be able to make it relevant, make it grow. I'm amazed at just the computational efficiency and the energy efficiency of all of these, complex computations being done by quantum computing. Now I think it's one of those things that doing that at scale and everything, we have some way to go because the technology is, we shouldn't lie, right? It's like quantum computing has been around conceptually for quite some time, but it's one of these things that you're really pushing at the edges of physics to be able to actually sort of actualize some of these things.
Yeah, like I would say it's been through different periods. So when I started, it was like the physics of the devices.
Right.
Then we got multiple qubits working, but we could still simulate everything.
Right.
So even though it's been going since 1995, I would say exactly when it starts you can debate.
Yeah, sure.
Shor's algorithm is a good one to say, all right, we understand that,
Yeah.
but maybe Feynman in the 80s. But essentially, it took a long time to the 2010s to the 2020s of going from 1 or 2 qubits to 100 plus qubits.
Right.
So in that period, we could predict everything these machines would do. Mm-hmm. Now we have machines that we can no longer predict or simulate them. We have to actually use them as part of the scientific method. So it's changed, it's almost gone through different types of evolution. But yes, it's been around for a long time. That's why I even say quantum. Like quantum has been around for, 2000, this year is supposed to be the 100th year of quantum.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but like quantum itself has been going for a long time. The quantum computing is now starting to enter where we can get this new period emerging.
Yep.
Yeah. And maybe we didn't discuss this question, but in that ecosystem that we were discussing, what will be the role that governments and maybe like public policy could play?
Are you starting on
Yeah.
me?
Of course, thanks. That's a hard one. I think, so we're going to have a separate session on cryptography, which is an entire conversation on itself. I think government, so right now, governments, I think, a lot of this costs a lot of money in terms of the development and things like that. So the advantage that governments have is the ability to kind of take some of that investment, especially if it's something that's of systemic importance. And frankly, I believe that this is of systemic importance, and be able to kind of spread those costs out and things like that. Now, the government also has an obligation to the taxpayer and everything else to be able to mobilize this. And I think that because the government, all governments really, they sit between for-profit companies, nonprofit institutions, research facilities, universities, public school systems, all of these. They kind of have skin in the game for all of that. And again, I think earlier we were talking about that right now, like with a regulatory framework, a lot of regulation is based on sort of this punitive paradigm, where it's like you really have to think about what is the incentives. Like I think with the quantum ecosystem, you need more players, and you need to sort of incentivize players, whether that's through research subsidies or things like that. The government can play a number of these roles, but I think that they're in a better position than other institutions to be able to help orchestrate. They're probably not, they're not going to develop it, right? It's just the likes of Jay and his team and so on. But they're certainly part of the ecosystem, and they're a connecting tissue between all of the institutions in that ecosystem.
You said it very well. I would add that the US in particular has had a long history of funding fundamental science. And I think as we go forward, funding fundamental science is good. As things get more complicated, yes, industry comes in and builds. But we are going to see fundamental advancements continuously happen. Like you could imagine a future where we're talking about quantum computers. There's also a field called quantum communication. Right. And this is where I can send quantum signals across an internet. There's also another field called quantum sensing, where you can use the properties of quantum to make better senses. You can imagine a future where you connect quantum computers to quantum communication to quantum sensing.
Yeah.
There's some fundamental science that has to be done there.
Yeah.
Like I'm now taking qubits. We talked about qubits before that are inside a quantum computer, make them fly, hit a sensor, go back into the computer and do computation.
Yep.
So we talked about all the use cases, but I think that even limits us, because if eventually you're going to have this I don't know, quantum will be in everything, the communication, the sensing, all of it coming together. So I think that type of fundamental research has still happen. And of course, the national labs, making sure that education and workforce development is done, getting all that, I think the government has been and will continue to be an important part of this equation.
Mm.
So you already mentioned a little bit about the intersection of quantum and AI, so I don't know if there is something extra that we can add in there, but yep.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the tip of the tongue, this is it's not the latest obsession. I've been obsessed with this for quite some time, but this notion of causal inference. So similar, I'm a big fan of Dr. Richard Feynman, and like many others, he had sort of gotten his start with the Manhattan Project, with basically sort of government-sponsored research labs that have sort of gone through the entire sort of ecosystem of a lot of different technologies and things like that. Similarly, there's a guy by the name of Judea Pearl, who's doing quite a lot of work on causal inference. And I think causal AI, being able to fundamentally get at the causes of things, is very complex. And he's got a book, it's called The Book of Why, where he goes through and says, well, part of the reason why we don't have this notion of causal inference is because science is essentially based in the language of algebra, right? So y equals mx plus b. So the quotient of y is the same as mx plus b. It's implied symmetry. There's lots and lots of things in nature that are non-symmetrical, but humans by nature also, our own intuition makes it so we don't need causal inference. But now we want to synthesize an artificial intelligence that emulates all of these properties of a human, but it doesn't understand causal inference because we've never developed a language for that. So he has a bit of a proposal in the book on how to sort of think about these things. And I think that sooner than later, a lot of these causal inference problems become very complicated and complex and require something like quantum computing to be able to actualize, and then we can understand and then deploy some of these things. It's ripe with lots and lots of promise and a lot of peril as well, because then you're talking about once you get to that level, then you're talking about real, artificial general intelligence and so on, and the entire sort of corpus of both, benefits and risks that accompany that. But that's one of these things. I think that's a long run, but there's quite a lot of sort of intersections now. Go ahead, Jay.
No, so I know where you're going, and
exactly. I could see in your eyes.
I think of quantum. So I think of where AI, if you go to the math, right, it's essentially we call them tensors. And then we've built these ways of accelerating tensors, whether it's a GPU, AIU, or various different things. The fundamental thing that you actually run on a quantum computer is a circuit. And so I definitely see the future of computing as you run either on tensors or you run on circuits. To get a bit mathy geeky, you can think of tensors as linear algebra, and you can think of circuits as Lie algebra, which is what you were implying,
exactly.
where I have some operator. If I do something followed by something else, I get a different result if I do it the other way around. Mm. And so where people are investigating how quantum could impact into AI is when can I exploit that type of math? And it turns out that we can only do toy problems at the moment. So our algorithm researchers are playing with toy problems, but they can come up and propose toy problems that no matter how you look at them through a classical lens, they will look like random noise. And then when you look at them through a quantum lens, that no longer looks like random noise. And so this gets the correlation you're talking about. And so we've already done those toy problems. So we're in the quantum version of where the AI algorithms using quantum is kind of where the AI algorithms using the old accelerators were maybe 10 years ago. and they're doing toy problems and experimenting. But I believe that AI will sit up top. It will have, it will say, if my data can be easily represented by standard tools, it'll go to one type of accelerator. If it needs more correlations, it'll go to the other. I'm going to stay out of the complete
The AGI stuff, yeah.
AGI
fair
because I'm just staying in the math space.
Yeah,
but I do agree with you that quantum will give us a more advanced math to look at the problems.
Yeah, it changes our nature and then subsequently the corpus of things and the ways we think about it to deal with the increasing complexity, which is real, we just don't understand it. Like it's happening today, we just don't have the tools to really understand it at that fundamental level.
So maybe before we open up to the audience here, if they have any questions, like maybe if we can talk about like what are the latest breakthroughs in quantum computing, because there has been like a lot of them more recently, and probably it's gaining momentum.
Yeah, from someone in the field, it's continuously progressing.
Yeah.
And so, like, I often look back, I still remember some of the exciting days when I first entangled 2 qubits. It was like, wow. But what's happening is we're starting to emerge in this sort of algorithm space. And more people can start to integrate. So I think the biggest breakthrough last year was a combination of 2 things. I think error correction, the theory of error correction has got a lot better, that we actually know how to design and build SCODES, quantum computers that we could yield and scale it. So that's why we've got comfortable that we can predict that error correction, a fault-tolerant quantum computer will happen in the near future. And the second is we've got 2 systems that we can no longer simulate, and we're putting them in the hands of algorithm developers, and we're seeing, like, I take a quantum computer, I take a supercomputer, I run an algorithm over both of them, and I can do something that I thought was impossible with the quantum computer, or impossible with that one, and I could start to get algorithms working that are simulating molecules that honestly are getting comparable to the best approximate methods we have classically. So we're starting to see this quantum becoming a scientific tool, and they're the two biggest things that, from my perspective.
It's hard for me to add to that, but I think it's useful, right? Like of the so one of the things I was, I'm very grateful to be invited to your research facility for the Innovation Day.
Yep.
And one of the things the misnotions that I had was that these things would take a lot of energy, given their nature and things like that. And then I got to see, a bunch of these quantum computers sort of in the flesh, and it's beautiful, they're absolutely beautiful. And really all of that was the cooling element. So it's basically filled with liquid helium, and then it turned out that the cooling of the quantum computers, which seemed like very, very impossible at one point, it was actually relatively trivial in the grand scheme of things. Now the error correction was not, and now with the advances of that, I feel you get to this critical mass where you're able to solve a couple problems that become essentially vectors into the conversation for future development. So I think there's like flywheels on flywheels, but I think I'm thrilled that some of these things happen. And in terms of the innovation, this goes back to our earlier talk with the AI energy. We need a lot of computational firepower to deal with all of these things, and we don't have the energy capacity to be able to kind of generate all this. So if quantum computing becomes a lot more energy efficient for these complex tasks, and then you galvanize, the use cases to advance the science to be able to kind of mobilize into industrial applications, eventually that becomes less of a problem. I still think it's part of this portfolio where you're always going to have all of these. It becomes sort of an expanding corpus, and you're using the right tool for the right job. It's not one as a substitute for a lot, but I think by nature, quantum actually just helps actuate some of these things that are very, very energy intensive, and with quantum, it's not.
Yeah, quantum computing in the theoretical realization doesn't consume energy. Obviously, we have to cool it down and create control pulses. But yes, as we build larger ones, the energy debate is going to be a very interesting debate. And I think it has the potential to have a lot of positive impact.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So maybe with that, I will open up to questions. Yeah.
How many years out do you think how many years do you think Bitcoin has left?
Sorry?
I said, how many more years do you think, Bitcoin or they have left before they have a threat from quantum?
So you're going to hear, there's two sides to that, right? So obviously, our current belief is that to break encryption, we need a quantum computer that is a few thousand qubits and can do 10 to the 11, 10 to the 12 operations, right? And to achieve that, we need error correction fully working. Error correction working at scale, we'll show prototypes by the end of this decade, and then we have to scale it into the next decade. So I would say that you're going to break standardized encryption, whether it's elliptical curve or RSA. I think Bitcoin uses elliptical curve, if I remember correctly. Probably in the, I would not predict longer than 10 years or so.
What if the error correction, there's a breakthrough there? Do you think,
Sorry, what was the question?
If there was a breakthrough on the error correction?
I already think last year we had breakthroughs, and now that's why we think we can engineer it. But when you develop hardware, it has a certain cycle for learning time that we are very aggressive about, but you have to scale it. So that's why I'm confident in the numbers I'm giving, because we've had a few breakthroughs, but now we have to scale it. The flip side, which you'll hear a lot more about, is there are algorithms that are emerging that we don't believe can be broken by a quantum computer. They will, and I want to let the second panel have that topic. So there is both the let's be scared side, but then there's the let's actually upgrade side. Sorry, I didn't want to say too much about the next panel.
No, that's fair.
No, that was
We got some heavy hitters for that one as well.
Jay, you talked about a situation where classical computing and quantum computing are sort of operating in parallel. Classical computing tends to be very sort of mechanistic, process-driven, A, then B, then C. And it would seem to me that a company like IBM would be looking very seriously at how to make classical computers and quantum computers talk to each other in a way that was productive, because this isn't just the next step in Moore's law, this is sort of a modality change, like a step away from flat world.
100%. So we have always had the view at a high level that the future of computing it's going to become the most exciting time for the future of computing. And you're already seeing it in AI, and quantum's going to add. The future is going to be very simple. Bits, neurons, qubits, and we better build a heterogeneous architecture with accelerators that accelerate different math that is easy to use. So you want a heterogeneous computing architecture. So you need something that can leverage like hybrid nature, so hybrid cloud, but now it's hybrid accelerators. And now you got to be able to create that software that can communicate between them and can do it. I'll be honest, we're still starting. We've decided to partner with a lot of people and national labs and universities that do a lot of HPC. So in the US with the DOE and with RPI and universities like that, we've prototyped quantum computers next to classical computers. In Japan with Fugaku, which is one of the big supercomputers, we're actually already working with them on an algorithm and about to install one of our quantum computers next to that so that we can explore the algorithms on that side. But like, you can think very much the future of computing is going to be heterogeneous accelerators that accelerate different math. And then innovation is going to be driven by obviously building better accelerators, but equally important, and you just saw it with some of the innovation in the AI from algorithms. Algorithms can make a huge difference when it can, say, exploit those different accelerators in different ways. And I think the algorithm working with accelerators is an underappreciated topic of how much is going to drive positive impact in general, whether it's to AI, to new algorithms, that's going to emerge over the next few years. So I think you're going to see the future of computing is going to be, you're going to see huge surprises by simple algorithm discovery using different accelerators.
And that's the force multiplier.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Perfect. No, I think with that we can leave it to
Yeah,
the other
let's-
panel to cover more on cybersecurity
Quench the
and
thirst of
encryption,
quantum, yeah.
and if our bitcoins are safe or not.
For 10 years.
But thank you very much, Jay. It
Thank you.
was
Thank you.
really interesting.